and a half with 10 people on it. It was fine.
Oh, okay, great.
So who knows?
Capitalism.
Yeah, one of our mastermind groups. So I think it also depends on your neighborhood. Is it, how you're wired in? Because everybody's at home on their devices right now. So
okay, all right, we are on.
We're on. All right, take it from the top.
I got some snackies to.
Some epic, too. Yeah.
Do you like these?
Yeah, they're good.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, pass one over here.
I would if I could. All right.
That'd be a nice Zoom feature.
Oh yeah.
Pass snacks.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool.
And today we've got a guest who's going to be joining us shortly, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to go ahead and jump into our beer. So the topic today we're going to be discussing is influence of crowds, during times like this where people get a little hysteric.
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Can't find toilet paper on the shelf. Yeah, something like that. But
yeah, just buy everything in sight. So yeah, that'll be interesting. We're going to talk a little math. Never do math in public, so we're going to let our guests do all that. And
yes.
His name is also Jonathan. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah. You were sending me the emails back and forth, and I was so confused, because all I saw was Jonathan in the back and forth emails. Like, what? Huh? It's really hard for me.
Who is that?
Jonathan, are we interviewing you yourself?
Right.
I didn't. Yeah, whole nother side of you. I didn't know. Split personality with the same name.
I've written this book called I forgot what it's called.
The Evolutionary Dynamics of the Insurgency in Iraq, a mathematical model of the battle for hearts and minds.
Yes. Yeah. That sounds like something I would come out with, right?
It's hey, it does have a little military and history to it. So
there you go. Should be interesting.
Well, that was an article anyway. I don't know what his book is. That was the article. Catchy title.
Yeah. He's also done one. This is one I'm pulling up here called, what is it? About bees.
I didn't see that one.
Listen to us about bees. We got a guy from Harvard University. Hey, tell us about your book about bees. The evolutionary dynamics of bee colony collapse disorder.
Well, if I had known that, if I had read my pre-show notes, I would have found a mead to bring onto the show instead of just a regular beer. But I haven't been out of the house all week this week, at all. I don't think, other than like a walk, but I haven't driven anywhere. So I am pulling off the back of the fridge stock leftover stuff. So by the time this little crisis is over, this pandemic, I will be all out of past beers for sure.
Yep. Did you say Pabst beers or past beers?
Past.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I will not.
No PBRs.
No PBRs. It's not that kind of show. So what are you having drinking? What are you drinking?
Today I have a lager, Tampa Bay style from Cigar City Brewing Company down in Tampa.
Yeah.
And I think I've actually had this one on before. I picked it up again. The one that I'm featuring on the next episode is going to be really good. I've never had it. It is going to be, I'm kind of wanting to save that one for next, because I know our next guest is having some wine or something like that. But
yeah.
So I was going to save that for him. I brought this out for just us, though. Lager, Tampa style lager. You ever been to there's a Cigar City down in Tampa? It's like renowned place for getting
I have not.
Amazing top quality cigars. Anyway, this is I guess they have now a Cigar City Brewing Company down there. So
yeah,
should be interesting. I don't think I'll taste any tobacco in here though.
All right, so I'm going to be pulling out as you're pouring. I'm going to go ahead and pull out mine. So I think I had this on the show before, and I don't actually remember what it tasted like, but I've got a Shiner S'mores.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
All right, so it's chocolate and marshmallow ale. If I remember, it had like a marshmallowy, but not as much chocolate. I don't remember which one of the two flavors was not as strong as the other. So,
Yeah, that's one of the better shiners, right?
Yeah, I mean,
That's one of those.
I haven't had a
shiners.
bad shiner yet. So, they're not really a true craft brewery, but they're starting to have more and more craft beers. But it is a true Texas brand for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, so Shiner S'more. It's not very dark, but kind of depends on the light. But
it depends on what you compare it to.
Exactly. So, well, cheers.
Cheers. Mm. Mm.
Yep.
As much as we love dark beers, this hits the spot right now because I was exercising earlier today.
Oh yeah.
And this is one of those thirst quenching type beers.
Yeah. How's that going for you without your gym being open? Are you?
Yeah, I've got. Did
you get a rack and all that stuff?
Yeah, I got a squat rack, and I've got a barbell with probably it's about 400 pounds of plates.
That's a good starter set. Yeah.
So yeah, man, I'm holed up here. I could last a good while in here with enough food. Also, I got some Epic bars. These should last me.
Oh yeah, you can live off that for a while.
Oh man, I didn't think I would like these at first until I had.
They don't look great.
No, they don't. I mean, you can see in the packaging. Look at that. I mean, it looks like a square, just kind of.
Looks like something you'd find in MREs.
Yeah, exactly. Or you'd get like at REI, just something to keep you alive.
They do sell those at REI, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do. So
yeah, they're pretty good.
This is a bison.
A bison, yes.
And loaded with protein, but
sodium.
Yeah, a lot of sodium. But if you're having a beer like this, it's really good with beer.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of that salty, the beer offsets it a little.
Yep. So, see, I love how you're just like, everybody's got to get used to eating on Zoom now, like.
I just spit my food out.
So
I'm serious. People live on Zoom, right?
I know, right? I've literally been on Zoom all morning with capitalism and some coaching programs we're doing there. So like, and now everybody's just starting to get comfortable. I mean, you and I, we've been using this for years, and it's funny. It's like seeing people come on. I don't know if you saw the video that was going around of the lady who she literally carried. I'll wait for you to finish drinking.
Okay, sorry.
I didn't want you to spit it out. Spitting out the food's fine. Can't waste the beer.
Beer is a sin.
So I don't know if she just didn't understand Zoom or whatever, but literally she was on a Zoom call. She picked up her laptop and took it into the bathroom and went to the bathroom while the video was still on.
Oh no.
So, yeah.
That reminds me of Joe Biden. I think he was trying to do like 2 weeks ago, he was trying to do a live video, and he was walking away from the camera, and he was talking into his phone as he was walking away from the camera.
Is this thing on?
You don't understand any of what's going on.
That's not how this works. Yeah, so it's interesting seeing the world come around to video conferencing. And I was talking to our buddy Scott Smith yesterday, and he works for an organization. One of his things that he does, he works for an organization that is they were very much in person. You got to be in the building, all that kind of thing. And I know a lot of people, probably not a lot of our audience, but a lot of people, have that world. And he was just saying, he's also an entrepreneur like us, and he does a lot of work from home stuff, but for this particular company, he has to go in quite a bit. And so he's just like in heaven, because now they've adapted to his world.
Right.
And everybody loves it apparently.
Yeah.
Except the CEO, he's still not quite on board, because he can't be in person, and you can't control people quite as much, and that kind of stuff. But he said the CEO asked about people's productivity, and across the board, everybody's productivity was up, because you lose all the idle chit chat, the water cooler stuff.
You get right to the point,
and you're just there. Unless you're vacuuming or dusting or procrastinating in some other household chore way. I know I'm the only one that does that, but
Well, it is interesting because with a lot of my clients, I've done some conference calls,
Mm-hmm.
and you're right. You get past a lot of the social, like how's the weather? You may touch on what's going on. You can't help but touch on what's going on around us right now for like a few minutes, and
Yeah.
then you get right into the topic at hand.
Right.
But I've noticed, efficiency levels, for what I do, getting right to the heart of what we need to discuss and then out.
Yeah.
Of
So
course,
I'm
right now,
curious.
yeah, I
With
mean,
with your manufacturing clients, are they still going into the plant and they're doing their Zoom calls from there, or like the
no,
executives and stuff
a
from
lot
home?
of, no, a lot of engineers are having to work from home now. Because
Wow.
that's not something, only the essential workers that have to be on the floor running the machines
Hello.
inside of the plant.
Hey
Those
there,
are,
Jonathan. I see
Sorry.
hey,
you.
that's Jonathan on.
Sorry, I'm a bit late.
That's all
Oh,
right. No,
you're fine.
you're right on time. We were doing our little pre-show banter here, so we're all good. You can turn on your video if you want, if you know how, or if
Yes.
you have a video,
Yes.
feel free to. There you
Hey,
go.
there we go. Awesome.
Hi. Maybe
Look
I'll
at that
turn off the light.
smile. Look at that smile. I like that. All right.
So, so should we call? We're very casual on the show, Jonathan. So I just want to make sure. We should call you Doctor Farley?
You can call me Jonathan, but then you might get confused with me, and I might get confused as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
We'll call you Doc.
Okay.
there you go.
Welcome.
Yeah, so we're glad to have you on today to talk about this. Should be an interesting topic on society and kind of influencing the mass crowds. Sean and I have kind of touched on it. Our show is about persuasion and influence, and we talk
Yes.
about this on a regular basis. And we've talked about a couple of episodes here over the last couple of weeks, and just kind of hinted on just the way that people operate from a mass standpoint. The hysteria of the masses. People seems like people individually are fairly rational, but the irrationality of crowds can be evident, like what we've seen over the last few weeks with shortages on things like crazy things like paper or toilet tissue of all things, which is crazy. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I know Sean is. We want to introduce you first to get started. Kind of let everybody know from where you're coming from.
Yeah, this is
Far-
important because we need to let the people know that we have just upgraded our guest list once again. Because I'm reading the bio here and I'm like, holy crap, does he know what show he's on? So,
Thank
yeah,
you.
we're just a couple of guys. Although we were close to getting into Harvard, Sean and I, we missed it by a few points on the GPA, right, Sean?
Yeah, I missed the SATs by about 1,000 probably. So, but pretty close. They're probably an ACT kind of place. I don't know.
There you
I don't know
go.
which they are. Because you and I were old school. We were quarter system.
Yep.
And we were SATs.
Yep.
So
exactly.
We're a little old, but yeah. So I'll let you go ahead and crank up the bio there.
Yeah. So Dr. David Farley is our guest today. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard University with the second highest GPA in his graduating class. He obtained his doctorate in mathematics from Oxford University after winning Oxford's highest mathematics awards, one of Oxford's highest mathematics awards for graduate students. He's been a visiting professor of mathematics at Caltech, a science fellow at Stanford's University. I'm saying it too fast. Stanford's University Center for International Security and Cooperation, a visiting scholar in the Department of Mathematics at Harvard University, and a visiting associate professor of applied mathematics at MIT. I got to catch my breath for a second. He's also the author of The Evolutionary Dynamics of Bee Colony Collapse Disorder. That's a cool title. That'll get people's attention right there. So, Doc, thanks for coming on today and joining us for this topic.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's an impressive list of schools, I have to say. So for two Southern boys who probably aren't great at math, this is pretty intimidating. At least it is. So, but yeah, that's we got Harvard, Oxford, Stanford, and MIT. You kind of ran the table there, full house.
Yeah, well, some of those places were places I just visited.
Okay.
but or actually at Stanford, I was as you said, I was a science fellow at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. But a lot of the ideas that I wanted to talk about, I started thinking about when I was there as a science fellow. I'm a mathematician, but I was trying to apply math then to issues like terrorism. But I learned about some of the topics that you want to discuss today. For example, I remember there was a man, I think is a sociologist named Granovetter, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, who wrote about riots in the 1960s. So that's something that happens when you have a mass of people. I guess one or two people could have a riot, but
yeah,
generally it's something that only happens when you have lots of people. Somehow there's something like a phase transition, as the physicists say, and people decide they're going to do something.
Yeah, I mean, like we saw this going on in Hong Kong, kind of before all the virus stuff happened. You know, we won't get into conspiracy theories. That's the next episode. But as far as that's concerned,
I can throw out a conspiracy theory that in the case of Hong Kong, even though I didn't study it deeply, but I'm not going to let that stop me from talking about it. You know, it could be that groups like the CIA would want to try to generate protests. And since everyone was wearing a mask, they could send people over maybe to try to stir things up and then help create that kind of phase transition, like when water crystallizes into ice. Yeah. Or in this case, they really wanted things to boil. But and so you might ask the question, how many people do you need to really get something like this going?
Right.
Or in the case of the East German government, how many spies do you need to monitor everybody? Maybe you want, if everybody's a spy, I guess it doesn't really make much sense. But if you have too few people, you can't monitor everyone. And so but also you limit the likelihood that your network will be detected if you keep it small.
Right.
So these are questions that are to be applied to many different situations. And that's what's so great about using math to try to model some of these situations, because what you get could be applied in different ways.
Yeah. So if you want to spy on people, like I think the fewest number of people you can use is one, as long as their name is Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh yeah.
So he's figured out how to spy on the whole world.
Yes.
Himself. Well, he's got a pretty big team now for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great question. Like how many people does it take to start tipping people into panic? Like we've kind of seen this happen here in the US, and it seems like right now we're in the last week of March as we're recording this, and it seems like there's still about half and half of the country that, as with anything else lately, that are like, oh, this is overblown, and the other half is like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever since the Black Plague or whatever. So what does it take? But the panic is still there. Like there's still, even if you don't really believe it's like dangerous or whatever, there's still this anxiety that I think everybody has because there's so much uncertainty.
Yes.
But what does it take to, two questions. How many people does it take, since you brought that up? And then what role, if you have any opinion on this, what role does the media play to tip that one way or the other?
Well, that's a good question. You'd have to come up with a model. And even though I'm a mathematician and you might think I like precision, I know that human beings are not, at least we think human beings are not robots or automata. So you'd have to bring in psychological factors, and that's not my domain of expertise. However, it has been the domain of expertise of co-authors and colleagues of mine. For example, there's a man named Vladimir Lefebvre who defected from the Soviet Union, but he was called one of the civilian giants of a particular branch of psychology called reflexive control theory. This was written about by Lieutenant Colonel Timothy Thomas of the US Army's Foreign Military Studies Office. He wrote an article about Russia's reflexive control theory in the military. And in that article, he called Vladimir Lefebvre, one of my co-authors, one of the civilian giants of that theory. And this was used to try to determine the decision-making process of an adversary. So it's something that the Russian military specialized in. But my colleague, Stefan Schmidt and Vladimir Lefebvre tried to apply it to the stock market. This is a place where you don't want panics. In fact, they used to call stock market crashes panics, if I remember correctly. So they had the idea that if you looked at investments in groups of companies somehow by modeling the emotions. And again, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm not a psychologist. They could try to get somewhere. And so Stefan Schmidt actually tried using the theory he developed. They were working actually with a man who ran a $1 billion hedge fund. But he tried to apply the ideas he was developing, and he took some $4,500 and expanded it to something like $45,000. So I immediately gave him my money. And last time I checked, when I asked him how much had the money grown by, he said it had gone down to about a third. So I don't know if his theories work. I suspect that they don't, but this was an attempt at trying to model what's going on with the stock market. But since the stock market is based on exuberance and fear, even though we have it, and obviously a lot of people like it, it's I wonder if it's something we should peg our economy to, because it can be, as we've seen, so volatile. I don't know what the alternative is, because another area I am not an expert in is economics or financial analysis, but it certainly seems almost dangerous to hitch our wagons to something that could be as volatile as the stock market. But in terms of the number of people who are questioning what's going on, I noticed that battle lines, even at the beginning of this month, March, battle lines seem to have been drawn along the usual political lines.
Right.
And so you could go to, if you watch the Ingram angle on Fox News, and sometimes they post videos on YouTube, and you could go to the comment section and see people attacking Democrats. The Ingram angle is a conservative show, and blaming them and using bad math to argue that we had nothing to worry about, because at that time, the total number of deaths, I think, was under 80 or something like that. I don't remember the details, but it was low. And then the comments I saw were assuming that there'd be some sort of linear progression, like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 to the number of deaths, whereas the number of deaths we expect from flu would at the time was much higher. And for example, car accidents, I think 50,000 people die a year or something like that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but they were comparing that to the number of deaths so far from the novel coronavirus, and that was bad. That was just bad reasoning. And so what I advocate, and this may come as a shock to you since I'm a mathematician, is that we need to teach people more math, because in school everyone says, when are we going to use this stuff, right? But now we're seeing the curve. We're even talking about flattening the curve.
Right.
So it would have been important for people to understand the difference between a linear progression and an exponential progression that keeps going up faster and faster. The rate of the increase keeps increasing. And so this would have been vital, because then people would have seen that, for example, if you have one infected guy at the beginning of February, and say each infected person infects 2 people, and that's it, even if that's all they infect, then say that happens within 24 hours. I'm just making up these numbers. They don't necessarily apply to the novel coronavirus. But by the end of the month, you would have over 500 million people infected. Now, that model is not a good one. It has flaws, but with simple arithmetic, people would, if they understood exponential progression, they would have seen, oh yes, this could be a very serious problem, even if we only see a very small number of cases right now. Within very quickly, it could be out of control, and that's what we are finding.
So let me ask you, as a mathematician, let's say that the president called you up and said, we need a really good way to explain this to people that's simple, is easy to put out on media. Like, so how would you persuade people to take it more seriously and to grasp that if they're not mathematicians? Like, I saw one picture that I thought was really good, but I'm going to let you talk. Because the flatten the curve we had a guest on last week or the week before is a great phrase,
Yes.
But I don't think people understand any of the math behind it, right? It's like it's a good catchphrase. The curve is a good graphic, but I think it doesn't lend itself to understanding the mathematics, right? And I've even heard that whether the curve is steep or flat, like the area underneath is the same. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's one thing I've heard.
Well, I haven't looked at it recently. When I did write that article on the honeybee colony collapse disorder, you remember how bees were disappearing from managed colonies. And it was even mentioned in that movie, The Happening, with Mark Wahlberg, the M. Night Shyamalan movie. But that particular logistic curve, I'd have to look at the equation again and then do the calculus. But yes, that would be a terrible way of trying to persuade the public by showing them an integral from calculus.
Yeah.
What I would have started off with is, unfortunately, we were caught, what's the expression, flat-footed.
Yeah.
I have flat feet, so no one will call into your show complaining. Because this should have been done before the pandemic.
Right.
But at the very beginning, I would have hoped that the American people were sufficiently informed about math from their schooling that they would have seen what I was explaining before, that one person could infect 2 people, and then the next day you have 3 infected people. And then the 2 newly infected people each infect 2 more, that's 4 more. And then you have 1 + 2 + 4, 7 people infected. But then you continue with that math, and you get, by the end of the month, over 500 million. And you could show that's like power of 2 to the 29, say. And then and people would see that that's a big number. It's over 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000 over 2. So this is something that could be explained quickly, not waving my hands, but at least visually written down somewhere. And I think people would have been able to grasp that and then they would have accepted extreme measures early on. They would have said, yes, we understand why you have to shut everything down. If that in fact was the best policy, that people might have been more willing to accept that. They would have been persuaded because of their previous training in math and understanding exponential growth. And dare I say it, geometric series, but okay, I'll just stop there. But so that's what I would have done. The next thing I would do, I think that ship has sailed. It's too late to argue that.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, the fact is, this or any other major, event that requires math. I mean, the fact is the majority of the American population is not great at math outside of, addition, subtraction, even that's up for debate at this point. So we've got to figure out a way, how do we communicate these types of scenarios to people? So yeah, I'm curious to see what you say on the second point here.
Yeah, so the next thing that I would do, and perhaps one could still argue with this with the naysayers, is an epidemiologist at Harvard. I believe his name is Mark Lipsitch. I mentioned his name in the New York Times article that I wrote about the bees. He estimated that between 20% and 60% of the population could get infected. Now, I don't know if he has updated those numbers, but those are numbers similar to what other experts have been citing. Now, this is the fallacy of authority, if I'm not mistaken, but we use it all the time anyway, right? Like when you want to go to a doctor, you don't go to a carpenter, unless the carpenter is Jesus, I guess, but you don't go to a carpenter, you go to the guy with the medical degree, and you don't go to medical school yourself, you go to ask this guy. So it's really, you're using this argument, even if it's a fallacy technically. So these experts were giving these kinds of numbers, and then you go, well, there are 330 million people in America. The World Health Organization, again, argument by authority, they estimated that the mortality rate was 3.4%. And then you just plug in 3.4% of 20% of 330 million, and you get 2 million people dying, right? And so that dwarfs any of the numbers that they might have heard of for flu. It dwarfs the numbers they might have heard of for car accidents. And then maybe people would see, yeah, this would be happening in a few months.
Yeah.
Or you could pile on and say, well, 15% of these people, according to estimates coming from China, are going to have a severe case. It requires hospitalization. And then you look up this fact, oh, we've got 1,900,000 staffed hospital beds. So that means if 330 million people are in the country, and 20%, according to the lower estimate of the Harvard epidemiologist, get infected, and 15% of them need hospitalization. Well, we have, I can't do the math in my head, but
oh, come on
something
now.
like
All those
20
degrees, you
million
can't do the
people.
math in your head? Come on.
I can estimate it though, but something like 20 million people are going to need hospital beds.
Right.
And admittedly, they're not going to need them all at the same time, but that message could get through to people. A lot more than 1 million are going to need these beds. And so that means a lot of those people who might otherwise have lived probably are going to die. If you need hospitalization and you can't get to a hospital, it seems likely that you're going to die. So that's another argument that I would have continued to push. But I would have done the other thing too, that the battle lines were along political lines, I've noticed, and still seem to be. You still see liberals bashing Trump, even though other countries like Canada, whose government the Democrats in America like, they're facing this problem. And Boris Johnson's UK, they may not like him, but they're facing this problem. It doesn't seem to matter whether you have a liberal government or a more conservative government, they're facing the same problem. They were all caught basically unawares.
And they're all treating it pretty much the same way. Like they're all managing it pretty much the same way.
Yes, eventually they realize they've got to shut everything down. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to attack Trump and Trump alone and say it's his policies that created the problem. And so I would go to the people who like to think that they are smarter. I'm not saying that they are, obviously, but they like to think that they're smarter than the Trump voters say, and tell them, look, would you rather be seen to be right, or would you rather save millions of lives? Because by making it political, you are forcing the conservatives to react in a way that says, okay, this is a hoax. They just want to wreck the economy, the great Trump economy.
Right.
Those are the comments that I'm seeing on the right. And so the liberals should have said, and might still be persuaded to say, okay, we're going to stop attacking Trump and just try to encourage the other people on the other side to engage in these behaviors. Now we're talking about the social distancing so that millions of lives are spared. But I want to say something about the policies too that we're using. I don't know as a mathematician what the right policies are or should be. And this is why I don't just blame Trump. I blame previous administrations, Democrat and Republican, because they should have prepared in advance. While they were telling us that the greatest danger was some guys in the Middle East who on their best, our worst day, killed 3,000 Americans, and that was the greatest danger we faced. No, our greatest danger seems to be this, right? If those estimates are right, millions of people in what they're calling the homeland, possibly dying because of what I think could have been prevented. And I can use math to show that. For example, we have no masks, right? No N95 masks. We don't even have enough for medical personnel. Well, I did some Googling and I found, before they all disappeared, that just guessing what the actual cost to produce the masks was, that all 330 Americans, including infants, could have gotten 3 masks a day and 3 pairs of gloves a day for a month at a cost of under $1.1 billion. Now, again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I would like to believe, and medical doctor could chime in, that if everyone was wearing masks the way they did in Asian countries, and if everyone was wearing gloves, that would have dramatically reduced the rate of transmission of this virus. I mean, for a month. And the median time at which it takes for symptoms to appear is only 5 days, although there was a case in China where they appeared after 27 days. But if you wait a month, I would think that this would have dramatically reduced the rate of transmission, and at much less than what it costs to stimulate the economy with these $2 trillion packages. Right. Another example I could give is Lysol is out of stores. You talked about bathroom tissue. Lysol is out of stores. Oh, wouldn't it be great if we all had Lysol to kill a virus, right? So when we get our packages, we could just liberally spray those packages. We could spray our hands. Who needs hand sanitizer? Let's just spray our hands. Then how much would that cost? Now, I couldn't find the actual cost to produce a bottle of Lysol or can of Lysol, but let's say it's $1. I think it's probably much less than that.
Right.
Then every American household could get a new can of Lysol every day for 2 months for under $8 billion. Again,
Right.
Bloomberg wanted to save America. This is his chance.
Yeah.
Right. Because imagine if I didn't have to worry about running out of disinfectant and I could just spray everything, then I think it'd be very hard for me and the people I care about. Well, I care about everybody, but me and the people who are closest to me to get infected. And,
yeah. So like, this is where I'm curious, like, math is really powerful. A lot of you smart guys like use math to figure stuff out for us so that, we don't have to figure it out for ourselves. But man, then you get into the human equation, like you talked about earlier. Like, even if you could supply masks and disinfectants to people, getting people to use it is a whole nother persuasion ball game. That is hard to do. So like, we're going back to kind of the question of like, is there a tipping point on stuff around adoption of ideas where we know that if I see, 3 of 10 of my neighbors, it's kind of the tipping point idea from Malcolm Gladwell or, that stuff, right? Is like,
yes,
how many of my neighbors do I need to see before I'll start adopting it? Because I don't want to be the weirdo that's not doing it. And then there's some people that just want to be the weirdo because they're contrarian and they're going to do it. They're never going to adopt.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point about, I think administrations get so caught up in putting out fires or whatever that, and of course, I don't know how much foresight you would have to know that a virus is going to come. But I think we all knew that at some point. I mean, if you can stockpile however many billions of barrels of oil in the strategic reserve, maybe mask and gloves and disinfectant should have their own storehouse as well.
Exactly. Now, we'd have to do a calculation, how many warehouses and all of that stuff. And I have not done that. But yes,
we have Amazon. I mean, just rent out a section of Amazon's 5 million warehouses that they have,
Yeah, the government should have anticipated this. We had so many science fiction movies. Now, admittedly, we're not going to prepare for an alien invasion necessarily, but, the Andromeda Strain, Outbreak
Contagion,
in the 1990s, Contagion in 2011.
Yeah.
This was something that people did talk about. And then we had actual epidemics. And so what should have been done was there should have been a task force going back decades, updated only as technology improved, to say, what if we had a virus with certain parameters? And one of those parameters, or lists of parameters, would be what we see now. So it resembles the flu. Well, it's not a surprise to anticipate something that resembles the flu. It has an incubation period of a certain amount of time within a certain range. And then what would happen? If it's too short, or if the reaction is too severe, if people start having their limbs fall off immediately, then we know you're going to have an immediate quarantine. You're going to be able to identify the people who are sick, and the public is going to be so afraid, and I want to get to fear later, that they're going to support any measures that you want to impose, whether or not you're skating along the edges of what's constitutional.
Right.
And then if it takes you, 300 days to develop symptoms, the hospital system could manage it, as we have seen, perhaps. I haven't done the math, but those are the kinds of things that a task force over the course of years should have looked into. And then they would have looked into the psychological component. They would have done some testing. You could have small groups of people say, well, what if this happened? How would you respond? And of course, people sometimes don't tell the truth, but I assume in the field of psychology, they know how to try to account for that.
Right.
So all of this would have been taken care of. A task force would even have said, if we need to take extreme measures, what's the likely reaction in the court system, right? They wouldn't have to guess. We wouldn't have every state being on its own, every municipality, every school district making its own decision. It would have been known this, according to our simulations, is the best way to handle some kind of viral epidemic with these parameters. And then you just go. You well, I'm going to pretend I'm opening up a book. It's like using a telephone like this if you're a stand-up comic. But yeah. I'm going to look up the file that was prepared in 2004, updated every 2 years, and just go by that playbook.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, Doc, I feel like if people knew, we're talking about persuasion, like if people knew that had happened and that we were prepared for this, and this is what the playbook says, that I think that inspires a lot more cooperation. Obviously, you're still going to have some people that are conspiracy theory and all that stuff. Like, but you're going to get, I do think you'll get a little bit faster adoption, a little more like, hey, this is scenario A, this is, or it's most like scenario C. And here's what we found works best. Amazon is going to be showing up at your door in the next 24 hours with 3 masks, a bottle of disinfectant, and 3 pairs of gloves.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
For every member of your family. It also might get people to fill out their census paperwork.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, is this just a ploy for so that census workers can actually find you this year?
Exactly.
Because I remember 2000, they were like, they spent months trying to find people to complete their applications. Now they're all at home. Just do it now.
Yeah. Right. You're right. It's a good point.
So 2 questions. Number 1, you talked about fear. So I'd like to address that however you were going to address it. But then the other thing is, we hear a lot about worst case scenarios and how do we talk about worst case scenarios? I guess what I'm asking,
mathematical standpoint.
Well, like what percentage of chance is a worst case scenario? Like, is it a 50% chance that it's worst case, or is it a 1%? Like, and I think that's something the public also doesn't understand, is like, how probable, I guess is the right word, is worst case?
Yes. So when Mark Lipsitch, the Harvard epidemiologist, made his estimate saying that he thought between 20% and 60% of Americans would get infected.
That's a pretty wide range, by the way.
It is a wide range. And I saw comments by people saying that caused them to not believe it, but they didn't get that in order to reject his hypothesis, his conclusions, they really ought to go into his hypotheses, his reasoning, because the wide range might be because he's guessing in a lot of parameters, but he might be guessing so much that it seems likely that the parameters in actuality are within the range that he is using. And so that means the number is going to be within that wide range. It doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he's talking about necessarily. Right. It means that the number is going to be in there. And so exactly as you said, it would have been helpful to say, yes, it's going to be up to, between 55% and 60%, with this degree of probability. But mostly we're 95% sure it's going to be between, I'm just making this up, obviously, between 30% and 45%, something like that. But then when you start getting too much math, I understand that people who don't like math, I love math, but other people might just go, I'm tuning out.
Right.
But it would be helpful for people to know. So, but that, to get you to your question, is how one addresses worst case scenarios. Because you tell people that actually the actual number is likely to be within this wide range, and you don't like what's happening on either end. So you're not going to like what's happening in the middle.
Right.
True.
And so that is one way to address it. But when it comes to fear, as you know from sales, it's better to motivate people to buy based on fear rather than, oh, you're going to have some advantage from what I'm selling you. How about you're going to suffer this disaster if you don't buy what I'm here to sell you? Yeah, I'm doing you a favor. And I think that is what should have been used. Not irrational fear necessarily, but people should have been starkly told, not just that 20% to 60% would be infected, but that 2 to 7 million Americans are going to die according to expert analyses.
That's a great point, because I have a copywriting background, and one of the things we're told is you never really use percentages, like, because people don't understand percentages, and even like numbers, especially when you get big numbers. So let's say 50% of 330 million, that's 160, something like that. like people can't see that number.
Yes.
The average person, right? They just don't know it. But if I said that would fill every Major League Baseball stadium in the country, it would be, it would sell out every Major League Baseball game in every city for 6 years.
That's something people can relate to.
People are like, oh,
yeah. I know
that's a much bigger,
right.
That's serious, right?
Yeah, or you could say it's 2,000 9/11s, or
right.
it's 100 Vietnams.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Something that people can get their head around. And I haven't heard any of those types of numbers or those types of images, because your brain doesn't, our brain, yours may, our brain doesn't work in numbers. It works in pictures. And until we can get a picture of what that looks like. So, most people have seen a picture of Arlington Cemetery. Imagine Arlington Cemetery, 500 times over. Yeah. And if anybody's ever visited, and a lot of people have, like that place just goes on. I used to actually, when I was in the military, I was stationed right there, and like it goes on forever. So if you've ever visited or even seen pictures of the headstones, imagine however many but multiple. Yeah, but I love the idea of like, it's 100 Vietnam Wars. That has a lot more impact to me emotionally than even 150 million people.
Yes.
Right. Because I knew Vietnam was bad. Even if I don't know the numbers, I think it's around 50 to 75,000, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I don't have to know the number. Like if I just know it's 100 times worse than the number of people that died in Vietnam, I've already associated Vietnam as bad.
Yes.
So my brain can make that leap. So, I think for your colleagues, if y'all want to persuade more people with math, using that kind of stuff is much more powerful than like just the numbers. And I know you guys geek out on numbers because that's, you love it. So that's a good point. I love that analogy, the Vietnam War one. So
yes. So what branch were you in?
I was in Army.
Okay.
And Jonathan was too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't play anyone in the Army on TV either, but I did write a monograph that was funded and published by the U.S. Army War College.
We did see that
earlier. Okay, yeah.
So you got and that brings me, because I want to see you when we were talking about political. We get into politics. People have social, political questions. I mean, people have individual. Very complex attitudes. I mean, this is the problem. I mean, we're made up of people of different political persuasions, different attitudes toward governments. But you had an interesting quote in there, and I want you to kind of explain that. But you said individuals are not electrons, but in some situations they behave like such. So maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah. So that was in a paper I wrote about winning the battle for hearts and minds in Iraq. So, and it was mentioned in an article from the Professional Journal of the U.S. Army, an article someone else wrote too about that. Because you can occupy a country, but throughout history, how many occupations have eventually been overthrown by the people? You want to win the battle for the hearts and minds. And so I had a simple model with a colleague of mine where we just said, well, what if we have people either support the U.S. occupation or they're against the U.S. occupation, and somehow neighbors can influence neighbors. Although, of course, these days, the people need not be physical neighbors for you to influence them. So you'd have to take that into account in any mathematical model, that you could influence people who are actually far away from you. And then we talked about the tipping point. If you had a certain model of how they might influence other people, how many, but there were some centers that were definitely for you and centers in the area that were definitely against you. How strong would those have to be before overwhelmingly the population was influenced to be against you? And that's where we found this phase transition, where it seemed that there was a certain amount, which after that point, very rapidly, the percentage of people who were against the occupation rose. And it was a very simplistic model, but it was meant to be expanded upon by people who are experts in this, CIA or, in the Pentagon. And so that might have come as a surprise to people who make policy, that it could happen very suddenly in this simplistic model. But then you have to argue, well, why wouldn't it behave in a similar way with actual people.
Yeah.
So that's what I was getting at there. And we could apply this in other situations too, how people are going to respond to a pandemic, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to persuasion, well, you said you're going to get to conspiracy theories later, but a conspiracy theory which is not completely out of the question, given that there's a Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the virus came from Wuhan, that the, what if this was released accidentally or deliberately, right? Certainly people are going to believe that, whether or not it's true.
Mm-hmm.
After people are finished fearing for their lives in 5 months, maybe, people are this conspiracy theory is probably going to blow up, and you could probably even do some mathematical modeling of that.
Yeah.
And so what is it about the Chinese system that makes them better able to handle an outbreak like this than Western systems? Well, for starters, in China, besides the fact that the nail that sticks out has to be hammered down. I think that's a Japanese expression, but regardless of that, it's essentially a military authoritarian system.
Mm-hmm.
So they can just force people to stay home. And because they support everyone economically, ultimately, I mean, yeah, they have capitalism with Chinese characteristics, but essentially it really is still a communist country. So people can stay home and without worrying about where their paycheck is going to come from, because they know where it comes from. And also, if several million people die, well, that's a bad year when the Yangtze River floods, right? So, or that's when their 5-year plan is off by a decimal point, 5 million people died. Yeah. So they're used to that, and Western countries are not. So in the Western countries, they're not going to clamp down right away. People do have freedom. They care about their freedom. And they didn't study exponential growth in high school, or they forgot all about it. So they're going to not want anything shut down until it's too late. Because people don't get their paychecks from the government, there is going to be an economic catastrophe when the government finally realizes they have to shut everything down. And so this virus would have been an excellent weapon against Western democracies, one which a country like China would be largely not impervious to, but one which it could recover from faster. There's a quote by an historian, I forget which one, talking about the war between Rome and Hannibal, the Second Punic War. And so there's that battle of Cannae where Hannibal killed 70,000 Roman soldiers in one day. And the historian wrote, what other nation could withstand such a defeat and not be destroyed? Whereas by contrast, when the Romans finally invaded Africa, there's basically one battle that Hannibal lost, and that was when the Romans invaded it, and then the Carthaginians surrendered. So it was a much weaker kind of state. So we have when after 9/11, people were talking about the war between the two types of civilizations. Well, now we have something where you have a state like China's, and I mean the People's Republic of China, versus Western democracies, and one is able to withstand a virus like this probably, and the other type of system, well, we'll see, but it's certainly not as able to withstand a virus like this. And it's safer than a shooting war. Sun Tzu would say, to defeat the enemy without battle is the acme of skill. And that's what we are currently seeing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, if you study economics a lot, people have been worried about some type of physical war to create a currency war. And this could certainly qualifies that, because at some point, the Chinese are going to want to get their money back from the dollars they've invested and all the currency war stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So do you try to create something that drives the dollar down or up or whichever way it needs to go? So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for sure. But, Doc, this has been fascinating. We're running short on time.
And,
But
Thanks for coming on.
Fascinating
today,
stuff. Fascinating
Yeah,
stuff.
it is.
Like there's so many different pieces to this whole pandemic and this whole situation that we've been talking with different experts about. It's really interesting to get these different pieces and different viewpoints. It's kind of like that movie with the 8 vantage points with Forrest Whitaker. I don't know if you ever saw that. It was the assassination, and there was like 8 different vantage points from the audience of how the shooting happened.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of feels like that. Like, talk to a psychologist, it's one thing, a mathematician another, all that. So we really appreciate you being on.
It's more like the 6 blind men and the elephant. But I wanted to come on because I wanted to reach Michael Bloomberg, and because I think it really may be as the title of the book goes, the super rich who can save us, because the dollar amounts that are required really are within the billionaire's ability, that they can spend that money. And I think it could have a dramatic effect on saving people's lives. So I hope they implement some of these ideas about the buying disinfectants.
I'm not sure if he listens to this show, but we'll reach out to him and see.
Yeah, it certainly would be good PR for them.
I hope.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos could certainly pull that off, you know?
Oh, yeah,
so
absolutely.
Be good PR for sure.
Yes.
All right, well, Doc, we'll let you go, and we're going to wrap up the show, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
All right, guys. Well, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Sean. Again, going back to numbers, algebra, geometry, trig, all that good stuff. Putting that together.
Yeah, that's who said we'll never use that stuff? I'm still not going to use it.
No. I'm like you, man. I like the idea of pictures.
Yeah.
Do so much.
If I can't figure it out on my phone
Pictures
calculator,
yep.
Then yeah, and I can't even use, like, you know, if you turn your phone sideways, it's a scientific calculator.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how to use that thing.
Nope.
So anyway, well, I'll let
you
you wrap it up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you made a good point earlier. You know, we're talking about the visualization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people talk about flatten the curve, which we talked about with
Dr.
last
Mazur.
episode. Yeah. Dr.
Mazur.
Mazur
like laser.
Flatten the curve. So that's easy to remember. But then, you know, you started seeing all these charts and a lot of these graphics and a lot of these videos that showed kind of from a graphical nature, you know, how that works in terms of flattening the curve. And
but it still didn't
visually.
it didn't hit the emotion still.
No.
And I think that's what has been missing from that argument. And that's why half the people are like, you still don't really understand one way or the other.
Sure.
You know, I don't think people on one side got bought in emotionally. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't have, but if I'm trying to get everybody to adopt, I don't feel like the argument was made very well to get everyone to adopt. And I don't even know if that's possible, to be fair.
It's we're such a big,
but we should be able to get to 75%, even with polarization.
Mm-hmm.
Just needs the right message.
Interesting stuff. Well, looking forward to our next episode, where we're going to be talking about conspiracies, how conspiracies work, why people buy into conspiracies, why people are persuaded by conspiracies. So you want to stay tuned for that next episode. Thanks again for listening. As always, you can find us over at Persuasion by the Pint. Sean, till next episode. It's been fun.
All right. See you then.
All right. So let's see.
So do we need a